In this video, I want to talk about what some of us experience as a psychedelic crisis, and just look at what's going on and what's involved in that probability. And the first thing is to think about the way we learn any new skill. And you can look at, for example, moving the body. And so an infant manages at some point to get up on their feet and crawl. And then at some point they stand up on their feet and they fall down, and they stand up and they fall down, and they start walking and fall down and walk a little bit more and fall down, and they learn to run and fall down and run a little faster, and then they get bigger. And they do it all at a much bigger scale. And by the time they're fully mature and have a more elderly body, they typically know what they're doing. But there's a pairing between the skill of operating the body and the speed of operating the body, the skill of operating the body and the height with which the body is operated. And those two go hand in hand in an organic process, that if you don't have enough skill to lift the body up, then you shouldn't be up. You should be down learning at a lower level physically, because that works better. And it's no different when we learn to drive. The last thing you want is to go from 8-year-old or 10-year-old or whatever to stepping into the first time into behind the wheel and be dropped into the wheel driving at 140 miles per hour on a NASCAR racetrack. No, you want to get in and learn what this sound does and learn what this does and test the steering wheel, and you want to drive forward 5 feet and then you want to stop, and you want to learn about the whole mechanics. But truly, if you want to kill someone, all you have to do is take a completely novice driver and put them into a 747 without any training and just say, here you are. And they would, of course, crash after panicking and pressing all the buttons and stuff. Because in a natural maturing process, you pair the competency of the individual with the environment in which they're in. And this is true with anything. Take yourself and drop yourself into the manager of a nuclear facility with no nuclear training, and you will have a disaster. Put yourself into flying a hang glider without any training at high speeds in a hurricane, and the odds are very, very low that you're going to come out of there all right. So in a normal maturing process, and with healthy parenting or healthy professional care, one is put into an environment at a speed or at an ability that one is capable to navigate. And we're a materialistic culture, and so the outer world is real. And so, we're using outer examples because we get it at that level. But the same is true at an inner level. If you take an infant who has learned that anger is bad in a shame-based culture, and suddenly, from 0 to full-on 100, you reveal the depth of their anger about being pent up in a crib and left while the parents go to work, and fed vodka so that mom could have sex with a stranger, and you open up the doorway into that energy where suddenly I'm totally angry, and anger is bad in a shame-based cult. That ricocheting, I'm totally bad, can destroy the sense of self, because there's no time There's no time to learn and figure out what's going on. And so the outer environment is, we could call it, the masculine expression of a dynamic. And the inner skill set and the inner sense of centeredness and navigation ability, we could call the feminine. But whatever you call it, when there is a discrepancy between one's skill set and the intensity and complexity of the outer environment or the inner environment, there will be violation, there will be dishonor, there will be pain, and thus you have crisis. And what high doses of psychedelics and high doses of any physical substance, high doses of arsenic, high doses of ketamine, whatever it is, high doses of MDMA, at a certain point, the psychological state that is released for the conscious mind is at odds with the ability to navigate and skillfully integrate what is being presented. And this is, of course, obvious. If you go from a reality where shapes don't move around liquidly and suddenly they're moving around, if you go from a state in which you feel this way and suddenly you're feeling this other way, and it's out of your control because of the intensity and speed of the influence. It's very similar to going from being an average build to suddenly having 400 pounds put on you. Now, many of us, if we trained for 3 or 4 years and learned about every muscle in the body and studied the science, could lift 300 or 400 pounds. But if you just go from day one to we're going to just drop 300 pounds on you, it can crush you. You can't get up. And the terror of being overwhelmed can lead to trauma and dissociation. And so this is the crisis with not only psychedelics, but after a certain, if you look at the crisis of how many relationships rupture when sexuality is entered too soon, it's a similar type of dilemma. And I'll look more at that later. So a discrepancy between the state one is thrust into at high velocity and the skill set one has to navigate that space. There's also a problem with the reduced filters and protection. One of the reasons that MDMA is a date rape drug is that we all, in a traumatic relationship culture, have developed protections and filters and little cues, red flags we call them, that say, no, I'm not going to become my most vulnerable right here and right now. A bar with a group of people I haven't met without safe sex conversations is really not the place to experience transcendent love. I'm not going to induce that state or open my body right here. And that's called a protection. That's called a filter. That's called, you've watched other people do that and you've watched what happened. You've explored that and you saw what happened. It doesn't feel good. And so you say no, 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 no. And you're looking for, everyone needs, has as a core human need, love and belonging. So you're looking for love and belonging, but you're looking for love and belonging that will fit that will fit a certain keyhole that you have developed out of all the data exposed to your ego, yourself. I looked what happened with mom, I looked what happened with my sister, I looked what happened with my brother, I looked at this and this and this. And so I don't want that. What I'm looking for is love and belonging, but it has to present itself in this way, for these reasons, at this time. That's the thing that seems safe to me. That's the thing that seems like it will lead to sustainable love and belonging, as opposed to just blowing up in your face and being worse than if it never happened. And so that's what I'm looking for. And this is called the protector. And the protector is constantly looking around and saying, no, that one's got that one's got this. Maybe over here. And it's not necessarily the most developed part of the psyche, and it's not necessarily the most intelligent, but it's doing its job to discern between positive and negative forms of love and belonging. And psychedelics blow the protector out of the water physiologically. They physiologically induce the state, much like forcing a lock. And so you can either, if a door is locked, you can put in a key and figure out exactly which key is going to open the door, and that's the one that comes in. And or you can just take a battering ram and pound it against the door and blow the lock. And psychedelics, as a high-dose substance alterer in the body, is and can be like a battering ram that says, I don't have time, I don't have patience, I don't know how to get into this door inside me. Meaning it's these are self-protections. Because the outer culturated conscious self, if you can imagine, for example, the indigenous parts of the psyche in a history where we are a culture and the individual ego is in many ways a refraction, a microcosm of the cultured mind. That is the expression of the culture probability as a whole. You can say this is not a safe culture for indigenous people. This is a culture that rapes, poisons, lies to, breaks its own laws, murders. To decimate the culture and the bodies of people with superior ecological intelligence, of superior sustainability, of superior sense of interconnectedness, ecological thinking, and sacredness, of superior empathy with their environment. And all of that was mown down. For what? And how was it mown down? It was mown down with battering rams, with guns. It was mown down by mass, superior numbers. It wasn't mown down with respect. And so, within the framework of the psyche, we who have been born into this culture, we are not safe as egotistical constructs that mirror unconsciously the core tenets of our cult, be it the tenet of chauvinism, that masculine energy is more important than feminine energy. That's very similar in many ways to saying that guns are more important than ecological consciousness, which we are living out the consequences of that imbalance, because when you murder and kill off people who have more ecological awareness, if you think of the phenomena of ecological impact just in the metric of, quote, garbage. You see, the Native American Indians didn't have garbage. They didn't have garbage because the earth was sacred. And it didn't occur to them to produce something that they didn't know what to do with. And so at the end of a lifetime for a Native American, there was no garbage. There was no big pile of toxic waste to be disposed of. But at the end of our lifetime, there will be 102 metric tons of stuff, much of it toxic, that we don't know what to do with. And so we've called it garbage. And so when you violate the cultures that are more sophisticated in a given domain, you maintain the unsophisticated level of your own culture through superior mass. And as a result, the design and the nature of our own psyche puts up more walls between the conscious culturated brain that's navigating our culture and the inner probability fields and personas that might, in a more sophisticated culture, blossom into more ecological awareness. It is the sustained hostility, the sustained brutality of mass and crude domination that lets parts of us know in the more feminine and liquid terrain inside of us that it's not safe to be present in our own body. That to be present in this psychic atmosphere is to be murdered, is to be violated. And so the sadness that haunts so many of us is the trail of those ghostly parts of ourselves that have been buried in order to respect the freedom of our conscious mind to live consistently with our cult, which is a shadow-averse cult, meaning it's very difficult to criticize the core tenets of the cult because the cult itself is self-referential. It's good because it's good because it's good, and that's why it's good. And it doesn't broke any skeptical assessment of the fact that as individuals, we will consume and turn into a waste product, meaning something that we as a culture do not know what to do with, more energy than any single individual in human history, meaning there have been 10,000 cultures in human history, and none of them have created more imbalanced waste and threatened our ecology or have overpopulated it to the degree that our cult has done so, which means that it is the single biggest failure in human history on the metric of taking large amounts of energy and turning them into waste, and on the metric of happiness per unit of energy. Meaning there are Native American ancestors who were significantly healthier, happier, more in touch with themselves, had higher levels of self-esteem, were alive in their body, that consumed 1,000th of the degree of natural resources that we do. For example, an American will consume 1,500 metric tons of CO2 and produce 102 tons of garbage, and will consume, as a result of the lifestyle and the shipping and the manufacturer and the transportation, 90,000 gallons of gasoline. So these are our metrics. And many of us are depressed, lonely, unhappy, stressed. So for all of this, like 1,000-fold increase in these kind of negative side effects of our culture, or less than optimal, they're certainly not optimal for our ecology and our planet and stuff, we may feel worse after consuming 1,000 times more energy than the culture that we killed off to make room for our culture. Well, that's not necessarily something to feel like, wow, we're the safe, this is a really safe operating system up here, the one that thought that that was a good idea. And so we have protections from ourselves, from our operating systems. There are sensitive and vulnerable parts that are howling in pain at these violations lived in daily life that would challenge daily life if they came out. And so we bury them. But we also, in the burial process and in the creative writing of our history, we come to a sense that everything that we're doing is right, is better. Not on objective metrics necessarily, or if so, we pick the metrics. We say, well, there's longer lifespan, and fewer people are dying of dysentery, and this and this. So we pick our metrics and say, yes, there is a longer lifespan, which is a problem when that entire lifespan is generating, significant volumes of raw energy that we call waste because we don't know what to do with it every single week. And it's also a problem when there are escalating levels of loneliness, because then you've got more time to be lonely and more time to, add to the waste pile and to the gasoline pile and to the, species degeneration. And so it's not necessarily self-obvious that taking an unsophisticated culture and extending its impact through lifespan and population at the same time. So everyone's going to live longer, and then we're going to have 3 times as many people, 5 times, 10 times as many people. It's not necessarily the case that that is intelligent or great for our species' future. It's just what we're doing, and so we define what we're doing as the greatest thing that has ever been done. In very self-referential terms. So there are parts of us that we're numb to, that we're blocked off because they're in too much pain. And we don't want to deal with that pain. And so there's a framework, whereas we learn to honor the parts of our heritage, the part of our history, the parts of ourselves that have been violated and negated within the psyche, that we reintegrate and start healing the wounds that we as a culture have caused to ourselves and to the ecology of which we are a part. Not our ecology, the ecology of which we are a part. And a relatively small part when you consider that all the oceans are part of the ecology, the atmosphere, all the other planets are part of the ecology. We are a part of an ecology and are learning that to kill off your host body, much like a cancer may be on its evolutionary path to learn, that if you rapidly and chaotically reproduce out of integrity with the framework of which you are a part, you have a short-term sense of exuberant reproduction and freedom, and then you're dead as soon as you kill your host body. And so we have protections against other people, against, aspects of the negative culture, against aspects of our own negative egotistical representation. The ego is what develops to relate to the culture more than it develops in our world to develop a relationship with the ecology out of which we are sourced. And this creates a split between those behaviors and paradigms good for our environment and those behaviors and paradigms needed to survive within the cult in which we belong. We also have reduced discernment of environment. It's been noted, for example, with DMT that you can inject DMT into someone, particularly 5-MeO DMT, and within a matter of seconds, one is transported into domains of the psyche that are completely unconscious of what's going on in the physical surrounding. Meaning you could inject 5-MeO DMT into a soldier in a war zone, and they would experience divine unity and bliss while being shot up and while their buddies are being shot up by machine guns. And so it's not just the protection of the mind saying what's a good idea and what's safe, but it's what is a good location to have this transcendent experience and what is not. And when the conscious mind is left in control, you have very few soldiers in Iraq deciding that this is the time while their buddies are being shot up to have a transcendent experience in which they and the person shooting them up are one. And so they don't. They get the hell out of there and keep their body alive. And so a drug can override the discernment of the physical environment, which consists of not only the objects, but the people in the objects. There's also the fact that the ego is suppressed. One of the interesting studies coming out of Johns Hopkins is that because we experience expanded consciousness on psilocybin, the active ingredient within mushrooms, we assume that the drug is activating dormant areas of the brain because life seems so much richer under the influences of psilocybin. And the opposite is the case, that what's happening is the area of the brain that filters out most of reality and reduces reality to the version of reality that our ego has decided is reality. And a little background on that. What we are conscious of is less than 50% of our sensory perception. So when you say, how do I feel? You're referencing less than 50% of the data coming in from your senses. And in situations like this, it's much higher, meaning I'm referencing right now well below 10% of my sensory data because my entire attention is on the content of sounds and the meanings of those sounds. And I'm referencing that. And so sounds are going on in the background, but I'm not hearing them. If someone said, what did you hear? I didn't hear anything. Air currents are moving around. There's all kinds of stuff that's going on that I'm not paying attention to. And this is the vulnerability and the freedom of the human ego, that we get to decide to some extent where we put our attention And our reality is what we saw with our attention, not all that's going on. But in what happens in psilocybin is that ability to tune out most of reality is blood flow to that area of the brain that filters stuff gets tightened. And so the ego that does all this sorting and discerning to maintain a consistent version of reality gets starved of food for a period of time. And that's all that happens. The substance starves the cultured area of the brain. And in doing so, the ego loses its ability to block off actual information from various parts of the brain that normally don't get a chance to talk to each other. So if you're in prison, for example, and you write a letter, your letter is read. And anything that's considered taboo for the prison gets crossed out as if it never existed. And then the person who receives your letter doesn't see what was in all those redacted areas. If you're a citizen of the United States and you want to know what your government is doing with hundreds of billions of dollars of, black operations, you can request information about how your tax money is being spent, and then you will see, whole pages with "the" is apparently safe for us to read, and then down 300 lines later, "way" was, and then nothing for 3 or 4, and then "he said," and then of course everything he said was completely beyond our ability to understand as citizens of our country, and so of course we can't be told what's going on. And so within any hierarchical control-based government, the control happens at the level of blocking information, blocking data from one part of the citizenry to another. And within any control matrix within a human being, the human ego blocks information that doesn't fit nicely into the official story that the ego is trying to put out, because it's a story it can deal with. Not because it's the truth, but because it knows how to navigate things. And there's a very large pattern within our cult's history of attacking any information that doesn't fit into the paradigm that we feel competent. And so rather than acknowledging the mystery of the unknown, our culture has done a very good job of maliciously attacking it. And it's one of the reasons that the federal government in the United States has viewed, unethically, meaning there's no database for a great deal of the ban on a number of psychedelic substances. But rather, in the Nixon era with Vietnam, Nixon had a meeting with his aides to decide how to hit back at protesters of the Vietnam War. And the Vietnam War is a cult product of a group of dissociated sociopathic minds deciding that world safety goes up if we send our people on 18-hour flights over to Vietnam to burn off the skin of a country, to set the country on fire. I mean, think of how many Priuses it would take to offset setting a country on fire, setting men, women, and children, and that this was necessary to protect our way of life 18 hours away. Like, oh my gosh, the Vietnamese are free to do what they want to do in their own country. heaven forbid that we could possibly allow them to work things out on their own. No, we have to burn them alive for their own good, for the world's good, to protect our country. And it seemed to be that the protesters who were most upset about this were students, hippies, countercultures, liberals. And none of that was illegal. It wasn't illegal to be a student. It wasn't illegal to be a hippie. It wasn't illegal to be, a Democrat. It wasn't illegal to be a woman. It wasn't illegal to be black, unfortunately, for Nixon. And so he had to come up with something that was illegal. And he came up with making psychedelic drugs illegal because there was a correlation between protesters of mass murder and global defoliation and people who had burst through the doors of their own psyche only to discover that they, in the repressed, regressed areas, buried by their own culture, were in fact upset at the violation of the ecology of which we depend. And they didn't know they were so upset before they burst in through the doorways of the psyche that the cult had asked them to close to fit in and be normal, to mask and block from themselves. And this was a traumatic event, to discover that normal was global violation, was personal violation, that the policymaker up here was a crook, didn't even abide by their own laws, but just clung to power desperately, like each one of our own egos does when we are presented with dissenting information for the paradigm in which we feel safe. When someone gives us the ledger book that reveals that we're bankrupt rather than swimming in money, by presenting new data that we have been avoiding, it's when we have superior mass, or when we are not particularly conscious, it's very easy to kill the messenger. And this whole terrain is wrapped up in this situation, because when you are given the ledger of the insanity of your own life, the question is, do you have anyone in there that is competent enough to fly the plane with the new data? Or is this jump out of the plane time because I can't deal with the fact that my entire life has been a lie, built on lies, lived with other people, lying to themselves and built on lies, creating an enormous amount of suffering and consuming vast amounts of needed natural resources to do so? Can I process that data and do anything intelligent with it? Or is it, suicide and drinking and addiction time to accelerate the tailspin because I don't want to face the reality that I'm responsible for as this huge chunk just given to me. And so there's factions within each one of us that is keeping all that data away, and there's factions in each one of us that is seeking the truth that the other parts are keeping away, and there's factions in our government that are frantically doing everything imaginable to make sure that the people in a democracy do not know what's going on. And then there's other people that hold hearings to try and figure out from those other people what's going on. And there's, a tension between the two, which one could say is, at a deeper level, do we have a processor? Do we have a self-government or a government capable of dealing with the data of what's going on? And if we deem that that is not the case, then we go out of our way to lie to ourselves and lie to each other, and because to protect them from the truth that they don't know how to deal with, which of course is a self-fulfilling process, because the less truth someone has to deal with, the less they learn how to deal with it. But there's this now large body of underground information and a large amount of dissociated naivete, and to bring them together without complete violation is somewhat of a skillful process, but that is needed for us to grow. And what a substance can do is it can clash that together violently, like a 200-pound ship against a solid poured concrete pier. And damage is done on both sides because the impact of the integration is bigger than the structure used to integrate the information is capable of withstanding. And so one can violate the port, so to speak, with the ship landing too big too fast. And what psychedelics are at their core is accelerants. They accelerate anomalous regions of the psyche. So if you've got a lot of suppressed fear, and so you're not in touch with your fear. I don't have any fear, of course not, because I've got a lot of repressed fear. Then a psychedelic can accelerate the flooding of fear, not just a little bit, but bash it through. And this is part of the nature of that violation. We're going to pass through the protector not by honoring their messages and their teaching, but with impatience and dishonor and violation. And when you knock the door down, you can't decide how much to leave it ajar because you've knocked it down. And the energy just rushes out without the regulation that is possible when you learn the art of the key. And this is, of course, the same true thing that's true with human beings, that if you learn to seduce a partner through their heart and their mind, rather than slipping them a roofie, you will have the skill to hold a container for the feelings and the thoughts that will be produced by the sexual act, such that by the time you create the biological synergy, the energetic synergy that is sexuality, it will be a symmetrical object of heart, mind, and body, of high-intensity energy held in a safe and secure container. The difference between lightning and an electrical grid that doesn't kill people. They're both energy. Lightning and an electrical grid have high voltage energy. The one starts forest fires, the other powers a culture. And the difference is in the sophistication of the container. And again, if you want to just take a 10-year-old with no training, etc., and plop them in and tell them to design an electrical grid, they will destroy and short out a city. If you take an electrical engineer with all the training and you drop them into that same grid, they will refine it and tweak it to be more efficient at delivering energy in the doses that are appropriate. And so all of this is speaking to the problem of why when someone gets drunk and has sex, particularly with a friend, they typically blow the whole relationship, because they open a doorway through the biology into regions of the psyche, mentally and emotionally, that neither person has the skill to honor, which means that regions of vulnerability and femininity within both people are violated through incompetence, through ignorance, through a lack of honor and humility, and in violation distort, go from their beauty and symmetry into ugliness, into shame, and in that process into pain. And in the experience of visceral pain, the awareness that the person who caused and who co-created that pain is the person you need to protect against. And so, thus, the dictum, don't have sex too fast. Don't invite all of these sensitive personas out when you don't have the competency to be a gracious host for the human being that you are inviting into relationship. Be gracious. Don't violate. If you want a sustainable relationship. And the same is very much true in psychedelic terrain. Be gracious. Don't violate if you want a sustainable relationship with the parts of yourself that you are blowing open, be it in rape, be it in violation, be it in overwhelm, be it in breaking the mechanism that regulates the door to those parts of the self. Be gracious, and you can have a sustainable relationship with these inner parts. Violate too much in the forced entry. And much like, there's this interesting phenomena in our culture of pedophilia, where the grown-up, with traumatic dissociation from their own innocence, naivete, and beauty, is on a quest for the golden ball that was lost down the well, for the part of their soul that made life musical. It was taken through incest, through addiction, through physical violence, through shame, through bullying. Their golden ball is missing. And life without the innocence of the feminine is a horror that's questionable in its worthwhileness to even live with that kind of depth of separation from what's most precious. The grown-up sees some of that innocence in a 5-year-old. And she wants it. She wants it. She doesn't have it anymore. She wants it. She's envious of the 5-year-old, but she wants it. But when all you've been taught is to violate the innocence within, how do you get close enough to learn what that innocence is without destroying it in the process of getting close? And in many ways, the draw to innocence is both the draw to go back to one's own wound, because in our culture, a shadow-averse culture, there is a tremendous amount of violation of feminine energy, of violation of innocence, of childhood trauma and sexual abuse. And nobody wants to deal with it. For all kinds of political reasons, no one wants to deal with it. And not the least of which is the fundamental economics that the abuser has the purse strings. Starting with the parents. The parents are paying all the bills. So if any business or any enterprise that has anything to do with those parents wants some of that parent's money, in a shame cult, you don't tell the abuser's secret, or you don't get paid. And so, you know, this is this is not set up as a cult to reveal the secrets, the inadequacies, and the data about what's off in the cult design. Most cultures have as their primary tenet to create an illusion of security by imposing mandatory memes that give certainty regardless of how absurd those memes are. How are you? I'm fine. You didn't even have to think, did you? I mean, what's the point of that? The point is that that's what people do. And people do it because they do it, and that's normal. And that makes people feel comfortable because they've done it many times and they're still alive. They're not dead yet. So they will do that. And if you want to belong to this cult, you shut up with your thoughts and ideas and you do that too. When people say, how are you? You say you are fine. Enough said. Ask me how I'm doing. I'm fine. So we're going to follow a meme of certainty and familiarity, and is one of the more humorous things, you know, one can observe in relationship. You will approach someone in this state seeking familiarity, and you'll suggest a relationship, and they will say, well, I don't know you. And it's like, okay, well, why don't you get to know me? It's like, no, I'm not going to get to know you because I don't know you. It's like, well, that's really smart, isn't it? So you're not going to get to know anyone that you don't know. So you're not going to ever get to know 99.9% of the planet because you don't know them, and that's why you're not going to get to know them. But if you even move beyond that, and you say, no, I can't spend this much time with you, or I can't have sex because it's been too little time. You know, so if we could just delay all of this for 3 months, then we can do this. But what's very interesting about our culture is you can learn in 5 hours much more about someone than they learn in 10 years of marriage if you focus on those things. But those are things our cult doesn't focus on. And so, for example, if in 3 months, rather than today, you have sex without any discussion about what monogamy is or is not, and if it is or isn't monogamous, and what the expectations are in the relationship and what they're not, and what the agreement is, and what, you know, like, I'm expecting you to do this, do you agree to it? You can do that in 5 hours with 250% more competency than you can do in 10 years of marriage, where you can ask married couples today and give it a try. Find a married couple and ask them both to write down exactly what monogamy or what their sexual container is and if they're in one or not, and then read them and see if they're the same thing. And that's just on that. Then you ask them what love is and how loved they are, and you ask their partner how loved does their partner feel, and you ask them how loved do they feel, and you say how loved are you and what does love mean, and that doesn't add up either. So it's not like time solves the problem. But you see, the problem isn't seeing your partner. The problem is normalcy. When you're trying to be normal, then you will do what other people are doing, whether it works or doesn't work. It's not, you know, competency is not the goal. Familiarity, which is a shortcut. Familiarity is one of the crudest forms of safety, because basically it says, I've done this 100 times and I'm not dead yet. And other people are doing it and they're not all dead. So I'm going to do that. I'm not going to think it through or come up with anything more creative. I'm just going to do what the majority is doing, because by definition, the majority are not dead, or they wouldn't be the majority. So if I just do what the majority is doing, it won't kill me as much as many other options. And the fourth crisis that the psychedelic experience presents, or that in a great spiritual gestalt, or that a relationship presents, is a shiny new object. When you fall in love and discover a part of yourself that you didn't know existed, when you take a psychedelic experience and you become aware of thoughts and personas and feelings that you had never consciously met before, when one finds oneself in the cockpit of a 747, 40,000 feet above the air, and everything is so peaceful and beautiful, but there's all these buttons, and it's working right now. It's coming in, but what do I do? When is this plane going to crash? When does it run out of fuel? I don't know any of that. When you find yourself with a shiny new object that one does not have the skill, the paradigm, the cultural references to understand, and most importantly, to honor. Honor means to be changed by that which you honor. In many ways, honoring is a form of attunement. To honor something is to say that I will attune myself to you out of respect for your existence and the beauty, truth, and goodness, or the terror of that existence. The beauty, truth, and goodness, common human ideals, what we're projecting as the next deity, is always some version of beauty, truth, and goodness to us. That's the deity. So when we bow down voluntarily, we attune ourselves in honor to our own deity. We say, you're valuable, and so I will adjust to this. This is sacred, so I will adjust to this. I'm not, if you're a Muslim, I'm not just going to make the most money. Money is sacred. But praying 5 times a day is more sacred. I'm going to adjust my lust and my business and this to honor this pledge, this something that is beautiful, is true, is good to me. And of course, the other form of honor is terror. I hate you, you disgust me, but I'm afraid of your gun. And so I will honor you. And it's not surprising, of course, that it is the most dishonored individuals that gravitate to the most guns. Because if you believe, from childhood upbringing and trauma, if you believe that you will be treated as valueless, perhaps that you are valueless, because you have been violated and used and humiliated and used some more, and being given the message that you not only have no value, you have a negative value. We would be better off if we'd never had you. We'd all like it if you went away. And so what you have is sustained chronic dishonor and violation, leading to the internalization of the belief, I have no value. There is no way in this cult, which cannot and will not and refuses to see me, there's no way in this cult for me to be seen as beautiful, true, and good enough to be honored, to be attuned to. And I cannot exist within a fundamental belief that I have no value. Because if I believe that, I will kill myself or stop protecting myself, because to protect something that has no value, has no integrity. It's not. It doesn't. It's the equation doesn't add up. That's not the logical thing to do. When everyone agrees, you included, this has absolutely no value, you pitch it. You get rid of it. You don't protect and nurture it. And so in the absence of positive value, the substitute value of terror. I do have value, you're right, it is a negative value, and I'm going to use that value to get you to do what you would have done if you'd been a decent, integrated human being in the first place. You would have shown value to the possibility field of an infant. You would have honored your impact on that infant. And you would have participated to realize a possibility field, a probability field, an actuality that allowed my potential to bless you with my strengths. And you were too stupid to do that. So you're going to bow to my gun. And this, of course, is part of the hierarchy of human states. Helpless worthlessness and the endless pain, betrayal, and addiction around that is the lowest state. When you move towards hate and revenge, you start climbing a little bit. So you move towards anger and grief, you climb up higher. You're going exiting the sociopathic brain barrier and moving into more of the empathic brains capable of feeling. You're becoming someone who can start to feel again and to relate. And way up there you have joyful innocence, the wise innocence of the fool. That has created a reality that is safe enough, that has enough honor for mature innocence, an innocence of power that comes from the sophisticated technology of psyche and matter to create a cult of honor, a culture of sophisticated integrated ecological honor. The integration of competency and love, the masculine and feminine expressions, one leading to the other. Competency leading to love, love leading to care, learning, growth, enough to become competent. Competency moving towards success, moving towards beauty, truth, and goodness, leading to love. Going round and around in this dance, loving enough to become more competent, becoming competent enough to love more, a beautiful masculine and feminine polarity. When this shiny new toy, when this shiny new persona in the psyche bursts onto the scene in a psychedelic drama, a scene that neither the conscious mind of the human ego or of those around them are capable of respecting, of seeing, and of honoring. It is like a blossom opening majestically and suddenly in an Alaskan wilderness, in which, as the blossom opens, it is frozen in 40 degrees below zero winds. And the fruit of that tree, the harvest of that tree, is lost in an instant, because the blossom occurred artificially without a container capable of holding it. This ego was not capable enough to hold that innocence, that beauty with integrity, with honor. And neither was anyone else around it, because the people around the ego created and shaped the ego. as a general rule, one can learn a great deal about the families and upbringings of an individual by who they are. And the one beautiful gap in that dynamic is imagination, because imagination is an environment. And so some people create worlds of great beauty, power, truth, and goodness in their imagination and allow themselves to be born out of their imagination rather than their past. But in a cult that shames imagination, that diminishes what it doesn't understand as just imagination, most of us are discouraged from letting the inner world be real. And in that environment, you can almost always predict the types of people who were around the children you see in the grown-up today. Because in ecological awareness, the culture decides what traits within an individual grow and which do not. Just like the technical form of a tissue culture. A tissue culture grows tissue. It doesn't grow the flu vaccine because it's a different culture. You have to put something into a culture in which that thing grows for it to grow exponentially. And if you put, for example, a germ in a pot of boiling water, the germ will die. Because the water is the culture, the water is the environment, the water is the ecology. And it's an ecology that's not friendly to germs. It's an ecology that's friendly to sterilization. It's not friendly to germs. That's why doctors sterilize. And so what is grown within a culture speaks volumes about the culture in which it is grown. However, our cult has a little twist on its theme, which is to say that we are all individuals. All of us are individuals. And it's so much fun spotting the Americans, overseas, because they are all individuals and busy letting everyone know about how individual they are. And it's like, oh, there's the American. It's like, how individual can you be if you stand out against everyone else, despite your skin color, despite this, by the cult template that says this is what America is about. And it's, of course, becoming a little bit more crazy as many aspects of American culture stagnate and other aspects of the world develop. And so this grandiosity is part of it, but this grandiosity of we're number one can't be finished very clearly anymore. Number one in obesity, number one in being the only developed country not to have paternity leave, let alone for both people, the most expensive place to be educated. I mean, we're number one in a lot of things. It's just not necessarily. And then, oh no, we're number one at making money. Well, we're losing that, very rapidly, as well as the integrated middle class, etc. So, what are we number one at? Well, it doesn't matter. We're just number one. It's easy. It's easy to learn about the culture when you engage with individuals within that culture. You're not as necessarily learning that much about them, who they would like to become if they could travel the entire world and pick their favorite culture and have these types of parents and do this. You're learning who they have become within this framework. And And that's taboo because we're individuals. We're not a culture. That's one of the things that separates Americans. Now, what the drug does to these flowering parts of the psyche is it provides a burst of artificial heat. So if you have a dormant fruit tree, it's normally going to wait until spring to bloom. Because what happens, as you know, is we have when we lose the orange crop in Florida with an early frost, is February came along and it plays a little trick. It gets nice and warm, everything's great. Come on out, flowers, come on out. And then March hits with a frost and all the flowers wither. And the whole fruit crop is lost for the year. And so, when that type of dynamic happens, they go out with heaters, they do everything possible to create a sustainable environment for that blossom. Understanding how sensitive it is, but how valuable it is. That blossom is the crop of that year. That blossom is worth billions of dollars, but the temperature, the environment has got to be kept warm enough or it will wither and die. Now, what a drug does is it forces summer in winter. Meaning the winter that we're in, the depression, the grief, the pain, the isolation, the numbness, the confusion, the winter that we're in is culturally induced. We're in winter. We're in a cult that has no sense of its source, either ecologically or in any sense of divinity. We're in a culture that is emotionally illiterate rather than being able to speak and honor the full range of feelings. We're in a culture in which we don't know what we're doing in all manner of domains. And we are in a culture that is pretending that this is just fine because we have the latest iPad. You too can expose yourself to high rates of EMF radiation 8 hours a day and dart around, distracting your mind in a great number of places, just as long as you don't focus on feelings, which are scary things. And this also, ties into the psychedelic journey, because when your government lies to you and says that for your own good, we're going to lock you up at $100,000 a year in a concrete pit to be raped and bullied by other felons for your own good, because that's how scary it is to take marijuana. I mean, we can't have this. Your inner being, what you feel inside, what you might see under the influence of psilocybin or anything else that cultures throughout history have had access to. It's like again, 500 years ago, if a Native American picked a mushroom and ate it, that was his business. Today, it's like, oh my gosh, we've got to put you in a concrete cell for your benefit. What if this caught on? Other people eating mushrooms, this is terrible. You might see something. Get in jail. We'll pay any amount just to keep you there, as long as we shut you up and convince everyone that there's these horrible things in there, their thoughts, their feelings, their ideas, that, they're dangerous to our cult, because our cult doesn't measure up very well when you see too much, and so don't look. And again, cult's primary job is to keep itself normal, because when people are afraid of the unknown, they want something to cling to that's familiar. And normal is that thing. So we will be your normal cling-to thing, however absurd. It will be normal. So in that dynamic, so much of the reason so many parts of our psyche are closed are that they terrified the grown-ups around us when we were growing up. We were angry and that upset dad and he beat us because you're not allowed to be angry at your dad. I'm allowed to be angry at you, and this and that. And then you feel like, gosh, I could be beaten if I'm angry. My fears really are important. My emotions really are horrible things. They get me beaten. And so there's a collusion between the culture and the survival tactics to hide all kinds of different things away, which then creates the belief that there are terrible things in there. And this is one of the things I appreciate about Joseph Campbell, is the awareness that the demons, that those evil demons are gods in disguise that have not been honored and recognized because the paradigm was too simple, the cult was too immature. The drug heats up the environment artificially, and parts of us blossom in the environment of the drug. And the question is then, when we come back, the ego and the people around us don't know how to honor the blossom, because in an organic development process, the blossom doesn't open until the environment is warm enough to open it. And what this does is it ensures the pairing between the blossom and the environment capable of nurturing the blossom. And what's being created here is honor, is respect, is a balance of masculine and feminine energy. The environment and the object induced in that environment, the circle and the point, are in harmony when the circle gives rise to the point, and the point that it gives rise to is the point that it is capable of dealing with. And some of the most painful situations come when there are very small pockets in an individual's environment that do produce a certain beauty, a certain truth, a certain goodness that is attacked and violated and dishonored in large other regions of their cult and ecology, thus creating this dynamic of, in order to live and integrate, the blossom needing to enter the 40 degree below zero terrain and wither the same blossom that is nurtured perhaps in a healthy, deeply held and sacred relationship. When an individual opens into their most sacred, meaning that which is sacred is that which we sacra, that which we sacrifice something for. To honor something to a certain extent is to sacrifice it by saying, you have the right of way. I would like to keep driving at 60 miles an hour, but I honor the fact that if we all abide by these boundaries, none of us will die today. So I honor my fear of death. I honor my desire to live. I honor the idea of law. I honor the boundary, and I honor you. I stop the car. I want to keep moving. I let you pass through, and then we continue in honor together. When parts of the persona are opened and no one knows how to honor them, no one recognizes the sacred. For example, we did not recognize the sacred in our Native American ancestors. We turned gods into demons. We turned human beings into animals. By the self-referential nature of our cult, that, likes shiny new objects and likes guns and likes this. So since we like that, and we've got more of them than you have no value. It's just that whenever we dishonor something fully, we cannot learn from it, because to learn is to honor. When we learn something from someone or from a book, we honor it by letting it change us. And that's what makes it sacred. It is the act of honoring that makes something sacred, because the act of honoring is the act of sacrificing, the momentum of what was, the past, that which is considered less beautiful, less good, less true, for something more beautiful, more good, more true. When we honor something, we make it sacred. And we honor it by seeing it and allowing it to change us in some way that acknowledges its existence and its purpose as a teacher. When I was thrust into the psychedelic experience on mushrooms and MDMA, having chosen Peter Sandhill as my sitter, there were a couple of different things going on there. First, my parents' fears of my feelings, for their ability to induce them into their feelings. Thus, my parents' fear of their own feelings migrating to become a fear of my feelings. When my parents were so terrified of their own feelings that they beat me, shamed me, abandoned me, shouted at me, humiliated and tormented me, to not feel, to not break the taboo in their system of safety, which was a partitioning off of large regions of the psyche that were not safe in their paradigm. I had to conclude that having these feelings in a dependent relationship was not safe. And yet these feelings, these life-affirming parts, wanted to keep coming. And so I internalized my parents' abuse and chauvinism to attack the feelings that were terrifying my parents, so that my parents would stop beating me and would like me, and I could meet my needs for survival, security, love, and belonging. Thus, in a roundabout way, associating deep feelings with death, with a failure to survive, feel secure, and have a sense of belonging. Making feelings a terrifying thing. The purpose of a sitter, for me, was to keep me safe going into the scary terrain of myself. And the idea was that someone else, in a certain sense, would be safer than me. This was questionable because Peter Sandhill pushed hard, very hard, to create a dissociative dose for my first psychedelic journey, and did so without honor. So what wasn't he honoring in this dynamic? Well, he wasn't honoring the dream that I had had just 3 days before about being overwhelmed and the importance of taking it gentle. He wasn't honoring the fact that when I had my first MDMA experience, I nearly died. He wasn't honoring the fact that as a traumatic history with repressed memories, that I didn't know how to deal with the emotions and memories repressed in my body, and so it's not a good idea. It's kind of like, a child. If you do know nothing about parenting, hold off a little bit until you've learned a few things. A dog, you're out riding a motorcycle and someone hands you a dog and you can't drive and hold the dog safely. It's not a good idea to take delivery of information, of personas, of energy, electricity. If you don't have a battery to charge and someone just wants to shock you with 300 volts, it's not a good idea. You have to prepare the space for it. And in a chauvinistic culture, this doesn't occur to anyone because prepare space for what? It's just imagination. So you have to prepare the space, and the space hadn't been prepared. So I wanted to go slowly, but Peter Sandhill wanted to go fast. And in a dissociative state and not getting any value because I could barely talk and stuff, he then suggested MDMA. And that opened up that took away the filter. What MDMA does is it blocks the love protector. And suddenly everything seems wonderful. And so I fell in love with my sitter. And the issue becomes when in a psychedelic experience, you induce a part of the psyche, a beautiful part of the psyche, that neither the ego of the person having the psychedelic session or the ego of the sitter or therapist or facilitator or friend or companions has the skill to honor, meaning that it is a part that is more beautiful, more true, more good than the persona in daily life. And in that sense, there is a desire. I mean, it's kind of like, you've been walking your whole life and then, bing, you're flying a 747. It's this great feeling, except you don't know how to land. Except you don't know when it's going to just crash the ground. You don't know how, you don't quite understand how it's taking off to begin with. You don't know if that's a gust of, you don't know what to do. And so it creates panic, as there's the discrepancy between beauty, truth, and goodness and the incompetency and overwhelm to respond. Because the ego hasn't gotten the drug. The ego isn't learning anything more than it had before. And it doesn't know how to make the gap between this part of the self and this part of the self. But in a shame-based culture, every human ego on this planet is terrified of fucking things up. Because in a shame-based culture, we look for scapegoats to blame. And it takes some doing to do this, by the way, because within system theory, everything is connected. And so, if you have a child that you're punishing and blaming because they didn't know how to ski or they didn't remember to lock the door, well, aren't you somewhat involved? Why did you, as the parent, having observed their abilities, if you were paying attention, give the key to someone who, if you were paying attention, did not have the tracking ability to always lock the door, that sometimes got sidetracked by beetles? So how is it only the child's fault that they got sidetracked by beetles and not your responsibility to notice who your individual is? If a therapist violates agreements, how is that just their responsibility and not the responsibility of the licensing board, of the peers, of the teachers, that chose and taught him and said, you're a good job. You know, go out and do this. You can do this. How is that not part of an ecological framework? And so in the myopia of chauvinism, the individual is highlighted at the expense of the circle, because otherwise raping the planet would not make sense. Because to rape the planet is to say that me and my needs are important and it's all about me, and so I'm going to do whatever I want, and the planet, you know, whatever, other people, they can take care of themselves. Well, that's the same theory, the same focus on the individual as the judge pulling a 20-year-old up and say, you know, this country doesn't make sure that parents know what they're doing. We didn't make sure that your parents were competent parents before having children. We don't make sure that hospitals in the birthing traumas know what they're doing, and so we set you up for trauma in birth. And we decided to leave emotional literacy out of school because that would be intelligent to actually teach people what feelings were. We also decided to teach you about life by separating you from life and creating an artificial environment that has nothing to do with life. Meaning in life, there's people of all ages and all genders, and they're in win-win negotiations to try and advance their needs. But what we're going to do is we're going to separate you by age and by gender, and we're going to have you listen to this person talk about stuff that you're never going to use in your whole life. And that's how we prepare you for life. We're not going to talk about that either. We're not going to talk about the incest in your church, and we're not going to talk about the fact that you saw the priest, you know, having an affair with your mom. We're not going to look at any of this. We're not going to deal with the fact that we don't raise men to be able to be nurturing because we humiliate them. And so your father felt humiliated and didn't know what he was doing with you, so he left you. And we're not going to talk about the statistics that we chronically tolerate in this culture. What we're going to do is turn you into an individual, a fictitious imagination of someone that has absolutely nothing to do with anyone else, and it's your responsibility. So, now that we've done our job to create a statistical probability field where you have an 80% likelihood of becoming a delinquent as we've defined delinquency, 1, and 2, a 100% certainty that you will not get help in that situation because we've made sure there's no one to ask. And if we put you in a job, we have carefully engineered the idea of professional to make sure that you can't talk about any of your personal feelings. That's not professional. Well, fuck profession. No. We're not going to pay you and let you live unless you are professional. So what's professional? Oh, it means hiding all your feelings and not telling the truth and being pretending to agree with your customers. So I had to live a lie at home, then I had to live a lie at school, and now I've been trained, so now I'm, of course, expected to live a lie at work as well. And then for some reason, some part of me rebelled against this system and said, fuck it, if you're going to violate me this way, I'm violating the system or the people that are part of this violation game. And so we take this young 20-year-old who hasn't figured out what's going on with all this and say, you are to blame. You're the corruption of our culture. You're the bad, horrible person. And so they feel like, oh my gosh, you know, the authority is telling me that it's all my fault. There's nothing wrong with our culture doing this for, you know, hundreds and hundreds of years and this. It's all me. It's all me. And so this is a crisis, and it creates fear and shame. When that's not acknowledged, one of the biggest side effects in a shame-based culture is being afraid of being caught, lying to avoid being caught, and feeling shamed and being punished when caught. And this fear reduces people down to the children that were traumatized into these fears and terrors to begin with. And so as Peter lived out, to a certain extent, his story of violating his high agreements, violating marital agreements, violating the law, violating attunement to his client, violating good psychedelic practices, etc., he also became anxious and afraid of being caught and being punished, which means you don't go to someone and say, please help me, I've done the wrong thing and I don't know what to do. You start, lying and hiding and stuff, which, again, to me communicated that just like my parents were terrified of the truth, Peter Sandhill, my therapist, who I was now in love with, was terrified of the truth. And so I'm carrying this belief like there must be something so horrendous in there that all these people are so terrified of, that know more than me, the parents and therapists and older people you're paying money. And it turned out that that Peter didn't know more than me. He knew less than me in this domain. But I was too afraid of the parts that my parents were so terrified of. It's like I don't know quite what it was. Because when parents are terrified of feelings or parts of their psyche, they don't kindly tell you and say, we're terrified of this because of this, and because we don't know how to deal with that. And then you say, well, Mom, that was when you were 4 years old. Now you can deal with it like this. And they're like, oh, yeah. They don't tell you that because, again, that would be intelligent. They just say, well, don't do that or I'll hit you. Go to your room. You're having feelings that are making me have feelings and I don't want to have these feelings. Go to your room. You're bad. And then they don't explain it. What was the common denominator? You made me feel something I'm not safe to feel, given my belief structure and my cult. So in that sense, maybe there is some horrible demon in there, bowing to Peter Sandhill's pushing to take more, but also pushing to not talk about the things that would help both of us to become clear. And so out of fear, out of my parents' fear of their feelings, and my fear of being punished and upsetting them, and thus my fear of upsetting Peter Sandhill, because he was scared. He was scared. But he didn't acknowledge or deal or honor the fear. And so there's a mutual induction into something that's truly beautiful, magnificent, flying a 747 30,000 feet in the air for the first time. There's all these little buttons and things, and I don't have a clue what to do about them. But I start talking, and what I say seems like a good idea. But Peter starts arguing with it. No, he is going to continue charging money, thus creating legal issues and all of this. He is going, he doesn't want to talk about this. No, he doesn't have blind spots. No, he doesn't want to do this. No, he doesn't want to clarify this. And so a part is brought in, as part of, one could call it initiation, one could call it a birth of a psyche, is brought in. And it is dishonored by the shame and the fear of the sitter with a stronger mass in a vertical relationship, such that it doesn't feel safe for me to push any harder against someone who's my caregiver in a dissociative state that is new for me, that I don't have confidence in. And so I allow myself to be brushed up in Peter Sandhill's fear, just as I was brushed up in my parents' fear. And later, when I bring this to Ann Watts, I allow myself to be brushed up in her fear. because one of the first things that she told me, after obfuscating and seeming to not fully believe, it was very clear that she was a different person in that interaction than when she was my therapist. But it wasn't clear why. When she told me not to tell anyone, and when Jason, sent me a contract saying he would, that this wasn't a high issue in any of this, and please promise not to tell anyone, and never to sue high. And when Peter Sandhill told me he would never trust me again for the rest of his life, I was that bad. This is when all that hits me. I don't have the confidence. I'm freaking out because I'm in a plane and I'm afraid it's going to crash and I don't know how to fly it. And my supposed sitter and teacher won't talk about it because it's not okay for him to be wrong, because it's not okay for him to, in his paradigm and in our cult's paradigm, if you're wrong, you get punished and shamed. And just when you need help and teaching and care, you get attacked. And it's a protocol that's guaranteed to see people don't want to be found out doing anything wrong, which means they don't get to learn. But it's predicated on a belief that, this is the underlying Christian framework, that you're an innate sinner for your entire life, and as an innate sinner, it's hopeless. You're going to do it wrong. And so the only solution, since you have to be punished, that's also part of the Christian ethic, so lakes of fire if you do it wrong, and you are going to do it wrong. Well, that's a great way to traumatize a civilization. But in that framework where you're going to do it wrong and you're going to be punished, lakes of fire for eternity, all this, then there's, I don't want to be found wrong. I didn't do it wrong. I didn't do it wrong. I don't want to be in a lake of fire. I don't want to be punished. I don't want to be this and that. So I didn't do it wrong. Well, I was afraid to be responsible for such a beautiful, shiny object with so much complexity, with my level of sophistication, which meant I needed help and guidance. That was my belief and my thought, and that's why I'd hired Peter, and the fucker ran off as soon as things got terrifying, making them much more terrifying because in running away, Peter gave me all of his fear. What he's saying by becoming more and more, disorganized around this and non-integrated, is he's saying, whatever it is that's going on there, it's so terrifying, I'm willing to go become a bit crazy to not talk about it and not deal with it. And it's like, it must be terrible. I've never had a therapist do that before. What is it that's so frightening that it can't be dealt with? And, and that frightening thing, of course, has nothing to do with this energy and me. It has to do with the fact that by being a professional caregiver in a relationship of violation, Peter made a number of mistakes and could then, in our cult, be punished and shamed and all that. Which means that denying it, if you don't believe you can change and transform, you've got to deny. You've got to deny what's going on as your only hope. But if you deny what's going on, it will happen again because it maintains a blind spot, which means it's got to be dealt with, which in our culture, the only way to do that is in court. If someone refuses to address the issue, because, of course, it's not Peter. It's the people who chose Peter. It's the people who trained Peter. It's the people who recommended Peter without boundary. It's the people who didn't reveal that Peter didn't have a license It is the system that is problematic. Peter wasn't born, dishonoring. He was born and, is integrating with various systems that, he believes are in kind of win-win dynamics of some kind. And so this is then the situation where the more of my therapeutic support structure is behaving irrationally out of fear, the more I'm getting the message that whatever it is that's in there is terrible. And the more that I am punished and disowned and shamed by being excluded. That's how you shame someone, you exclude them. You say, we don't want you around here. You're not good enough for this. We don't value you. Get away from here. You're a threat to us. Now, this triggers the biological memory that says that we are not safe except in community, that an individual will die alone in the wild. We need community. So to be excluded from your group is to die. Well, the last thing you want to do is be excluded from your group when there's some horrible thing in you that you don't understand and that no one's helping you with. So you want to come back in the group. But to come back in the group means you've got to tell the story, because that's where you are at. You're in, this is what happens to me, and here's where I'm stuck, and this. You don't exist where you are unless you tell the story. But the story reveals the incredible ineptness of the facilitator body. And so in a shame-based cult, that cannot come out. That's the bottom line. So then there's like, no, we've got to cut off your email address. We've got to sue you to make sure that your story can't be heard. Because we're not lovable if the truth comes out. And we can't face that. And so this is the crisis of the psychedelic challenge, is we can give birth to parts of ourselves, or we can break into parts of ourselves that are so sophisticated in their beauty that we haven't yet learned to respect and honor them. That's one crisis. The other is, if we violate those together, it may destroy a relationship, because you become the one associated with me violating myself and being violated to the greatest degree of my life, because it is very easy, like a bull in a china shop, to do a tremendous amount of damage if you thrash chemically into phases of the psyche that one is afraid of in a traumatized state and does not understand. Whatever you do basically has a 90% chance of being wrong in terms of its optimal impact on well-being. And so when we have the humility to understand that as consciousnesses, our biology is capable of 1,000 times more beauty, truth, complexity. But this might take 1,000 years for the species to develop cultures capable of honoring those parts in their child such that those blossoms would open. The brain is a little bit like this. We have a reptilian brainstem for the 200 million year old heritage of crocodiles. And the reptilian brain, with its fight, flight, freeze dynamic in crocodiles, kept crocodiles alive in the presence of other crocodiles and in dinosaurs, etc. And it is completely sociopathic. Now, when we find ourselves back in a crocodile age that is sociopathic, where we are surrounded by reptiles, people who are acting in fear and shame, they create a reptilian environment. And empathy is cut through. Because you say, don't you remember? And the person cuts through and violates the empathy because they're in survival, they're in trauma, and they betray the empathic brain until the pain meter reaches such a point that the empathic brain dissociates, and the sociopathic brain, the how can I survive in massive amounts of pain brain, comes on, and we relate back to reptiles as reptiles and hopefully navigate survival. And the reptilian brain does not release us from its traumatic protocols until we are surrounded by a stable circle of empathy that communicates the heat needed to release the lock in the reptilian brain, and the consciousness jumps up. It says, oh gosh, thank God that's over. What did it require? It required a warmth necessary to open the bud, because while the reptilian brain may be the stem, as it opens, we move into intense limbic terror, emotion, etc. We become just reactive emotionally. And we become conscious of thoughts. Then we become synergized, and we start, through understanding, empathizing. We start developing the empathic part of the brain. And then we develop empathy with ourselves, and then we develop the transcendent brain. And the transcendent brain is the part that viscerally understands our interconnectedness with every breath we take, with the planet that we live on, and every other human being and every other species. And in the transcendence of this limited cult, the transcendence of this individual ego, go out into the vastness of a larger ego, a larger sense of it's all connected. And when we have developed out of empathy and self-love, leaving the reptilian and traumatic terrain and going into the beauty and symmetry and grace of an empathic cult, this creates the level of safety, the level of integrity, the level of honor necessary for it to be intelligent to enter the transcendent brain. Because you do not want to enter the transcendent brain when you've got 30 people all pointing a gun at you, trying to kill you as quickly as possible, or trying to steal your food, or whatever it is. That's what reptiles do. Reptiles are capable of creating a reptilian environment of fight, flight, freeze, and survival, and that's what they're capable of creating. A reptile will create a sociopathic environment, and a sociopathic environment will create a reptile in terms of the brain, the primary brain being used as the operating system for survival. An empathic brain leads to an empathic culture, and an empathic culture leads to an empathic individual, which leads to an empathic culture. When you have high levels of empathy that are sustained without shock and trauma, that's the point when the temperature is high enough for the transcendent brain to open and start creating a synergistic world of being one. That's the doorway home, the doorway from the illusion of isolation to the reality that we have always been a part of the ecology that gave birth to us. And this is the big journey that is somewhat violated and pushed open through certain aspects. I think MDMA and psilocybin are high in that terrain that pushes through into that aspect. And yes, yet it is a terrifying aspect to have cherry blossoms in 40 degrees below zero temperatures. and to experience the withering of those leaves, the pain of that withering, the loneliness of that withering, the anger at that withering, the hate of not being able to stop that withering. And my blossoms were frozen, crushed, blown to pieces as I cried out, "Please help me. Please hold me. Please apologize. Please learn. Please advocate for me. Please protect me. I'm in pain. I need your help." And falling on sociopathic ears, in a survival state of fight, flight, and freeze, that went unanswered.